Hey everyone, it is Hunter Fireflower, and in today's video, I will be giving you a full summary of the new novel Queen's Peril by E.K. Johnston. This novel occurs right after Padme wins the election for Queen, and it goes into episode 1. So if you're really into Naboo in episode 1 and you want to discover how Naboo was going through the Trade Federation occupation, this is the novel for you. So I will be giving you a full summary, so there will be spoilers in this video. So the novel starts off on the Queen's election day on Naboo. If you are a candidate for Queen, you actually stay in this palace and you are all locked up in your own room. So Padme is in her own room and all the candidates she ran against are in their own rooms. There's this huge gathering of people outside. There's kind of like these parades going on. There's all these flowers going everywhere. It's very like the end of episode 1 where you had all those kids throwing petals and everything. And Sio Bibble, who is the governor of Naboo at the time, announces that Padme Amidala won the election as queen. One thing that is interesting though is Padme is actually one of the youngest queens to ever be elected. In this novel, she's actually only 14 years old. Captain Pinaka, who is the head of the royal security for the queen, then introduces himself to Padme, and then Padme goes to inspect the entire security force, and this is just a Naboo tradition. Once the queen gets elected, she then inspects the entire security force of who is actually going to be protecting her. Pinaka and Padme then have a little quick chat, and they basically go over security measures of what she wants done, and Padme is interested in having handmaidens basically join her as a security force, but also kind of as a companion. And Pinaka found a young girl that could possibly be Padme's handmaiden named Tisabin. Tisabin is this 14-year-old girl, and she was going through musical school, and she was always the second. Her brother is this aspiring musician. He's like one of the best of his kind out there. Meanwhile, Tisabin is always second. She's never the best. She's always the second one, and she always felt like she was living in her brother's shadow. And so when Pinaka offered her a job as being the queen's handmaiden, she did not turn it down because she believes that this might be opportunity for her to be actually number 1 for once. And Tisabin is Sabe. So for now on, whenever I mention Tisabin, I'm just going to say Sabe because it gets really confusing with the names. Padme is happy to have a handmaiden now. She's like, finally I can talk to somebody besides Pinaka and all the guards. Padme then asks Sabe, what she could give to her as a skill as being a queen. And Sabe is like, as a musician, I always had to control my facial features all the time. I had to always make my face seem very emotionless and stern, and I always had to control my breathing since, she was playing instruments and stuff like that. And so Sabe is actually going to teach Padme how to show no emotion as well as breathing, and so that you won't actually tell anyone whether you're upset or you're happy or anything. You'll just be this emotionless looking queen. The story then goes over to Pinaka, and Pinaka, he is kind of like this overprotective father figure. He's the head of royal security. He has to make sure that nothing happens to Padme, and he's like, she's hanging out with Sabe. Sabe's not trained at all, so we're gonna have to train Sabe, how to use a weapon and being a bodyguard and stuff like that. Meanwhile, Mariak, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, who is Pinaka's wife, is like, she's fine. So we always get this going back and forth of Pinaka trying to protect Padme. Meanwhile, Padme is like, I'm safe, don't worry about me. And it just really reminds me of Padme during Clone Wars, how she's always out and about doing something, never really doing anything safe. Padme then meets up with Sio Bibble, the governor of Naboo, and they have a quick chat. They then set up Padme in an apartment in the royal palace while the old queen leaves. Sindrasa, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, is done with her terms as queen, and so she has a whole week to gather up her stuff and leave, and then Padme will actually be living in the royal apartment once Queen Sindrasa has packed up her stuff and left. An interesting thing about Sindrasa is that she had these isolation policies. Naboo was the center of the galaxy for them. Naboo didn't really do any trading with its neighbors. They didn't really care what was going on in the sector. They were in isolation, and this is something Padme wants to change. Padme wants to reach out to her neighbors and try to form alliances with them. So this is one of the first things that we see that Padme wishes to do as queen. She wants to make these unions between everyone. She wants to make everyone happy. Naboo is kind of seen as this like uppity planet, they have all the arts, they have all the wealth and everything in the sector, but Padme kind of wants to humble Naboo and try to basically rekindle these old friendships with other planets. Another interesting thing that we learn about Padme and how she reigns as queen, when we see her in episode 1, she has this monotone, low voice. The reasoning for this was since Padme is the youngest queen, she wanted to give off the impression that she's actually mature and is a suitable person to run as queen. However, whenever she talks to her parents or her friends on comm, she acts like this excited young girl that you would think of a typical 14-year-old. So to the public, she is this stern, monotone figure, but behind closed doors, she's actually this loving, caring, passionate, energetic young girl. Padme then goes to her apartment and she relaxes. She's kind of lonely. She can't really have any friends in. Her family can't actually visit visit her. So she talks to her parents, and her parents are so proud and excited that she won the election. But the interesting thing about Naboo elections as queen is that you take a different name when you become queen, because they don't want to have the queen be associated with a family, because that might show some type of favoritism going on. So her whole family actually can't live in the limelight of her being queen, and they kind of have to live like a secondary life where, like, oh, my daughter's queen, but I can't really tell anyone type of thing. I can see why Padme would be lonely. I mean, she can't really see her family in real life anymore as queen. The novel then cuts over to Nute Gunray talking to Darth Sidious. Gunray is so upset. He keeps talking about how Senator Palpatine keeps throwing down these mid-rim tax bills, and how the Trade Federation is trying to make tax reform in the mid-rim, and Naboo and all these other pesky mid-rim plans just keep shutting it down, and he's just so upset. Sidious then reassures Nute Gunray that, you know, everything is going to work according to my plan, just keep proposing these tax bills and eventually it will work out. Even though Sidious is telling him, you know, just keep doing this, he's thinking in his mind, you know, like, God, Nute Gunray, you are just such a pawn in my scheme. You're not doing what I actually want you to do, but I don't really want to tell you that I'm the senator of Naboo. So he just kind of plays along with Nute Gunray, and whenever Nute Gunray does something that he doesn't want, he'll put on his senator hat and then just basically shoot down whatever Nute Gunray does to basically further his political goals. And then Darth Sidious ponders on having an individual that would be more direct and follow his orders like directly from him, instead of having to go through all these pawns and people. And I believe this is a reference to Count Dooku, because Count Dooku reported directly to Darth Sidious, so I believe that was what that reference was meant for. So then we go back to Naboo, and Padme goes through the whole queen ceremony, so now she's officially the queen of Naboo. She's staying in the royal apartments of Sabe, and as they're going through the royal apartments, Pinaka is like, you know, we need some more guards in here. You know, there's this huge floor, and there's only like 2 guards in here. We need some more people in here. And Padme is like, no, Pinaka, I am done with you being the overprotective father figure in my life. We don't need any more guards. You will train Sabe in the ways of martial arts and all this nonsense. And Pinaka's like, I was going to do that anyways. And so this is the first time where we see Padme not getting pushed around. You know, she might be 14 and she might be super young, but as queen, no one is going to tell her what to do. To make things a little bit better though, Padme then suggests to Pinaka, you know, why don't we just have handmaidens? Every queen used to have handmaidens on Naboo, and this goes back to a very old tradition when the Naboo were actually fighting with the Gungans, and the queen would have all of these handmaidens as decoys, so that in case the Gungans captured her or tried to kill her, there would be tons of these decoys so you wouldn't tell which one was which. And Pinaka's like, yeah, sure, I can go out and I can look for some handmaidens, and we will try to train these girls to be bodyguards and also decoys for you. And so Pinaka goes off to Naboo to find all of the handmaidens. So I'm going to go through all of the handmaidens and their backstory, so this might get a little bit confusing. So we already have Sabe, she was the musician, we talked about her before, and then we have Rabin, who is Rabe, but she got kicked out of art school because she was forging fake art pieces. So she was basically just remaking these famous Naboo art pieces and selling them to off-worlders, and so the art school was like, you know, listen, we can't have you do this, we're kicking you out. And so she is on the team to basically teach Padme how to basically deal with seedy individuals, how to deal with these underworld type of people, and how to lie. And then we have Eridama, I believe that's how you pronounce it, but her name is Arete, and she is this engineer. She actually worked at stage production for these operas, and she designed this hover pod, which was only meant to hold 4 people, but for some reason the stage director decided to put like 5 or 6 people on this hover pod thing, and then it crashed and burned everywhere, and Pinaka saw the whole situation, and Pinaka was like, you know, you are the engineer for me. And I think the reason why he decided to have her, even though this whole thing failed, was because Arete kept warning the stage director, you know, like, hey, this is gonna happen, you know, this is not gonna work if you put more people on this. I'm assuming that's why she was hired, and also because she's one of the top engineers in her school. Then we have Suyane, I believe. Her name is Yane, and she actually saw Pinaka while she was weaving at the market, and what she does is she basically was just weaving these blankets, and Pinaka just walks up to her and is like, hey, you know, do you do this all from scratch? You know, could you make fireproof and waterproof blankets and stuff like that? And she's like, yeah, I don't know why you would want that, but I could. And so she got hired. And lastly, we have Sasha, who becomes Sashay, and she actually is the youngest out of all of them. And Sasha just meets Pinaka randomly because Pinaka was actually going to go interview this girl, and as he was going to interview this girl, Sasha actually tripped him and kind of forced him to talk to her and kind of influenced him and manipulated him to hire her instead of this other girl. So that's really the only reason why she's there is because of whatever reason. They all then meet up at the royal apartment and they're talking about what they're going to do. Yane, who's looking at all of the queen's dresses, and she's like, oh my god, this is so heavy. You know, I can make a lighter version that looks exactly like this, and you know, we can make it fireproof and bulletproof and all this craziness. And then we have Rabe, she's like, you know, I can teach you how to like lockpick and do all this other stuff, you know, I can teach you how to steal. And as they're going through all of these skills that they can teach each other, they're then going to practice becoming decoys, and Sabe is going to be the main decoy, mainly because she looks more like Padme, and 2, she kind of sounds more like Padme. So Sabe is going to be the main one, and then all the other ones are going to have these other jobs to help with this whole decoy plot. The story then flashes to Qui Gon and Obi-Wan. They are actually at the Jedi Library, and Obi-Wan is over here studying these tax mid-rim bills. He's like, ugh, what a drag, you know, I can't believe I'm in the library studying this, Qui-Gon, you know, why are we studying this? And Qui-Gon just responds with, you know, something is afoot and I can feel it, the darkness, you know, blah, 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 blah. So this kind of tells us why they were selected to actually be sent to Naboo, because apparently they did all this research of the tax rim bills with the Trade Federation in Naboo before the conflict even started. One thing that was interesting that was brought up was they actually were talking about their deals on Mandalore, and Qui-Gon kind of pokes at Obi-Wan and mentions his relationship with Satine, but not directly. So it was kind of me reading in between the lines of, you know, that sounds like Qui-Gon is trying to say, you know, remember that time on Mandalore where you had a romantic relationship with Satine? I'm not quite sure why that was thrown in there to begin with. It was just kind of a little bit of fan service. Time continues on, the girls are getting to know each other, and Pinaka is talking to his wife, Mariak, and he's like, you know, hun, you know, these girls are up to something. I think they're up to something. They're scheming, I can tell. And Mariak is just like, you know, listen, hun, you know, I was a 14-year-old girl at one point. These girls aren't up to anything. They're just being normal girls. You are worrying too much and you need to be less protective. Pinaka's just like, you know, I think you might be right, but it's my job to protect her. And this just kind of shows us, you know, Pinaka doesn't actually know Padme personally, but he takes his job serious. So the girls have been getting to know each other over time, and they actually are doing the decoy plot. They tested it on some of the guards. They had Sabe dressed as the queen and Padme dressed as one of the handmaidens, and they're going to have Padme walk around the palace as a page to basically have people recognize her and not be like, hey, that's the Queen of Naboo, you know, as she's dressed in handmaiden clothes. And so they're practicing this whole handmaiden scheme, and one thing they noticed, they're like, you know, Sabe's voice is deeper than Padme's. When people started talking to Sabe dressed as the queen, they thought that the queen was sick, and so they're going to have Padme speak a little bit lower because Sabe can't make her voice go any higher. So having this whole decoy thing took a lot of time and practice for them. They had to get the makeup right. They practiced doing the makeup like in the closet. They practiced doing it down the hall. They made these little makeup kits so that if they had to travel, they could do it on the go. And this just kind of explains to us how they did the whole decoy thing when they were not on Naboo in episode 1. One of the first government meetings that Padme goes to, she meets up with Sio Bibble, and it's all of these advisors in the throne room. Very similar to what we see in the beginning of episode 1, where you have all these chairs and you have people sitting in all of the chairs and they're all discussing. So they're talking about food and crop production on Naboo. The soil of a lot of the farms is deteriorating, and so they propose that, you know, maybe one season we should not harvest any of the crop and we should just kind of let it sit there and rot, and then next season we'll have a lot more food and the soil will probably retain all of its nutrients and replenish itself. In response to this, we won't have enough food for this season, so we'll have to go to our neighbors to actually get food if we're going to do this whole thing. On the other hand, they could also just, you know, harvest the food, but the soil will deteriorate over time, and so at a later time they'll then have to probably trade for food. Padme sees this as an opportunity to talk to her neighbors. You know, she's the brand new queen of Naboo. You know, we might have a food shortage on our planet, but we can go to our neighbors who will probably have food and we can trade with them for food. Meanwhile, the next season we'll have plenty of food and we won't have to do it again. So Padme agrees to, you know, let the crops rot and harvest so the soil can replenish, and we'll just trade with our neighbors. Sio and all of the other advisors then send out all these messages to all of the planets in the sector, and they're going to try and set up some trade routes with Naboo for some food. As time continues on, the girls are getting along. They were having so much fun together, getting to know each other, but they're starting to wear on each other's nerves. We have Yane and Sashay. They won't even sleep in the same room. They refuse to work together. So everyone is basically pulling their hair out. You know, Yane and Sashay won't do anything together, and so they have to change everyone's schedules up, and Sabe doesn't like Padme when she does this, and, you know, yada yada yada. So Padme comes up and she's like, you know, we should all sit together and chat for an hour before we we go to bed, and we should teach each other skills that we have. You know, Yana is good at doing knitting and quilting and all that stuff, so maybe we should get all these supplies and we'll knit together for an hour. And then Rabe is good at stealing and lock picking, so maybe she'll teach us how to pick locks for an hour. And so this is what the girls are doing to try and work around all the differences they have. They're not perfect. They all have different personalities, and it just kind of shows us that, you know, how they're growing together as a unit as well as friends. The story then goes over to Darth Maul, and Darth Maul is angry. He's upset with Darth Sidious. He has nothing to do. He's hiding in the shadows, and he just ponders on his hatred. He's like, you know, I hate Darth Sidious. He always underestimates me. I basically feel useless to him. And then he goes on to say, I hate the Dathomirian witches. All of those Dathomir chicks, they all hate all the males and they shun us. And then he goes on to why he hates the Jedi. He hates the Jedi because they never sought him out for training when he was on Dathomir. He thinks of himself as being so strong in the Force that, you know, they should have sensed him from miles away, and they should have came to Dathomir and took him away and trained him, but since they never came, he's going to kill them. The story then cuts over to Coruscant, and the Trade Federation keeps trying to propose these tax bills, and the Mid-Rim planets keep shutting them down. Chancellor Valorum feels like he has his hands tied behind his back. You know, he can't show favoritism, but he kind of is siding with the Mid-Rim plans, and so he talks to Palpatine. He's like, you know, Palpatine, you know, should I try to get the Jedi involved with this? You know, this is a big issue, and Palpatine is just like, no, don't do that. And the main reason is because he doesn't want the Jedi to get involved with this whole dispute yet. He wants to get the pot boiling more before they actually get involved. Meanwhile, this is happening, we cut over to Mace Windu and Yoda. Yoda is meditating in the Jedi Garden at the Jedi Temple. Yoda senses that something is going to happen, something dark and sinister is happening, but Mace and Yoda can't sense what it is yet, but they know something is about to happen. Back on Naboo, the planets that they requested these trade routes for food never responded. Everyone's like, screw you, Naboo, you know, you didn't do anything for us, so we're not going to do anything for you. And so Padme is like, oh, we're going to be out of food unless we can get some trading going. So in response, Padme actually creates this giant party, and she invites all of the governors and all the officials of all of these planets to come and join her at this summit. The funny thing is, though, a lot of these planets actually don't show up to her party at all, and I think there was only like 10 that showed up in the first place, and a lot of them actually sent their children because they thought Padme was so young and so inexperienced that they just kind of like threw shade at her and said, you know, you're so young and inexperienced, here's my kid who will do the politics for our planet. In addition, Captain Pinaka is the head of security to make sure that all these people are safe, and in response to having all of these unknown people that might have these bad feelings to Naboo, he actually tells Arete to make a safe in the Queen's throne room, and they're going to put 2 blasters. And I thought this was interesting because in episode 1, when we see her pull out the 2 blasters out of the throne room, it was actually Arete that made the safe in the throne. So the day of the summit comes, all the guests are coming, and before they even talk about politics, they're going to have this fancy dinner, and then the next day they talk about politics. At this dinner party, they're just talking about their planets and having a good time. Padme notices one thing. Sabe has this thing for this girl named Harley from Jafan, and she is just fixated on her. Every time she says something, she's listening intently, and she's sitting right next to her, listening to everything, and Padme gets a little jealous. She's like, you know, I thought we had a friendship. I thought we were, you know, together and we were unified as a group. So Padme wonders if there's something romantic going on, but she doesn't want to use her power as a queen to force Sabe to tell her. After the first night, Captain Pinaka actually calls Senator Palpatine because they're close friends. Captain Pinaka just gives Palpatine the rundown of, you know, we have the summit with all these Mid-Rim plans. Padme's doing such a great job. She's unifying the Mid-Rim, and this is fantastic for Naboo. And Palpatine is like, oh yeah, this is great. But then as Darth Sidious, he's like, ugh, I'm gonna have to fast forward my plans and have Nute Gunray attack them because this was not supposed to happen. I'm not going to underestimate her, but the dark side will win in the end. After the whole dinner, the next day, Padme then has a chat with all the delegates, and they go through all these problems. You have some plans having issues with trade negotiations that were made like 15 years ago, so Padme's like, yeah, we can renegotiate some of these trade units. We have some of them saying, you know, you're taking all of our good artists, Naboo, get out of here. And then Padme's like, yeah, we can try to work out art training and programming, and we will try not to take all the resources from your planet. And so she's showing as a queen that she can do this give or take. You know, Naboo has a lot to offer, but she's willing to do so much to try and make friends with them, and in the end, she actually does get a deal to have food be shipped to Naboo from one of these planets. That night, Harley invites Sabe and all the handmaidens out to this concert, and so Padme is going to go, but as a handmaiden. However, Sasha stays behind the palace because she's not feeling good. So everyone sneaks out of the palace to go to this concert. Meanwhile, Sasha is just laying in bed sick. At this concert, Sabe and Harley are just dancing. They're all on top of each other, and Padme notices this. She gets a little bit jealous, and as they're going through this whole mosh pit, Padme gets soaked in this like glow-in-the-dark glitter stuff. Back at the palace, Pinaka is one of the security rooms. One of the sensors in the royal apartment goes off. So him and his wife Mariak, they rush out to the royal palace because they think someone's in trouble. They think somebody broke in or whatever, and they find out that Sasha was the only one there, and the queen and everyone is missing, and Pinaka is like, where are they? And so Sasha is like, I'll call them back. Sasha then calls Padme, and they all return back to the palace, and just like your dad scolding you, Pinaka is just like, what were you thinking? If you wanted to go to a concert, just tell me, and I would have went there and had all the security done. And Padme is like, I guess next time. The next day is the last day of the summit, and Padme is still covered in this glitter, and she's like, I can't be queen. I'm covered head to toe in this glitter. Sabe, you're gonna have to do this whole decoy thing, and you're gonna have to be in my place. So Sabe dresses up as the queen, and she goes to talk to all of the other delegates from the planets. Padme is dressed as a handmaiden, and she just kind of sits there in the same delegation room, watching and listening of what's going on. Padme then leaves, and she's walking in the hallway, and she gets stopped by Harley. Harley then goes on to say, I had a great time last night, we had so much fun, and then Harley tries to kiss Padme, and Padme just like steps back and she's like, no, you can't kiss me, get away, and she kind of runs away, and Harley just kind of stands there and is like, what happened? Later that night, Padme is back in the royal apartment, and Sabe storms into Padme's room, and she's like, what did you do? I got this angry letter from Harley saying how she never wants to see me again, something about that she tried to kiss you, but you said no, and Padme was like, yeah, I'm not gonna kiss her, I don't love her, yada yada yada, and Sabe is super angry, but she just cools off super fast, and she's like, it's fine, don't worry about it. And in the end, Sabe forgives Padme, and they try to make it up again. The following day, Padme says goodbye to all the delegates. Harley is gone. They have new trade routes set up. It's looking on the bright side for Naboo. They're making these negotiations and these trades, and it looks like Naboo is getting out of this isolation prison. Once the final delegates have left Naboo, though, this scout ship is scanned in the sector, and Pinaka's like, Padme, we have to return back to the palace at once. And once they return to the palace, they get a call from Nute Gunray basically saying, we have a treaty for you to sign, and you will sign this treaty right now. Sayo Bibble and Padme read this treaty, and it basically turns Naboo into a servant planet for the Trade Federation, and Padme just looks at this bill and she's like, we are not gonna actually sign this bill, Nute Gunray, you are crazy. And in response, Nute Gunray then starts a blockade. Padme is frantic. She talks to all of her advisors. She's like, what are we gonna do? We've never seen anything like this. Sayo Bibble just tells her, we have no planetary defenses. Naboo is not a militaristic planet. And then in response, they talk to Palpatine, and Palpatine is like, I'll bring this before the Senate in Valorum, and we will see what we can do. Palpatine then talks to Chancellor Valorum, and Valorum sends Obi-Wan and Qui Gon to act as negotiators and ambassadors for the Republic to the Trade Federation. Padme then has a discussion with Sayo Bibble. She's like, what would happen if I was to sign this treaty? They would basically take over the planet, but what would happen if I died? And Sayo is just like, they will re-elect a new queen, and she will be a puppet queen, and she will sign this treaty for you. So Padme is having this feeling that they might try to assassinate her. During this whole blockade, the food shipments that were coming from all these new trade deals were actually stopped and collected, so Naboo has no food. And Padme has her team do the numbers, how much food do we have for this season? And apparently Naboo only has enough food to feed the entire planet for 1 week. So Padme is frantic. She's like, people are going to start starving and dying if we can't change this. The Trade Federation then begins to start landing its troops on Naboo. Padme and her team are frantically trying to escape the planet, and Sayo Bibble, along with Yane and Sasha, stay behind on Naboo. Meanwhile, all the other handmaidens and Padme leave to try and go to Coruscant. However, before they leave, Sabe actually switches spots with Padme just in case the Trade Federation does capture them. The droids then invade the planet. They capture all of the citizens. They capture Yane, Sasha, and Mariak, as well as Sergeant Tonra, who is in Queen's Shadow. They put all the citizens of Naboo and all of these people in these prison camps. They're these giant canvas tents, and they have no water really. They just have kind of a well. There's no sanitation. There's little to no food, and so people are starting to starve and get sick. Yana, Sashay, Mariak, and Tonor then decide to communicate with this thing called comm code, which is kind of like this secret language that these kids would use as Naboo. Everyone in Naboo knows what comm code is. Think of it as Morse code except with symbols. And so Yana actually grabs these pieces of fabric from her own clothes and other people's clothing and all the things that they can get. She starts to weave these blankets that have comm code, and in these blankets she basically makes a map of the entire camp as well as the times of the guard rotations and where the guards are at specific times, and she makes a bunch of these blankets and she sends them to a bunch of the tents. Everybody knows where the water is, everybody knows the rotations of the guard, and so they start to make this kind of rebellion. As the days continue in this prison camp, people are starting to starve. It's not good. People are getting sick. And Yana and Sashay have a heart-to-heart. They're like, we're in this together. We didn't really like each other at first, but they actually admit that they always loved each other romantically, and that the reason why they never liked each other and were always trying to hide from each other and refused to work with them was because they just loved them. So it was kind of like this cute little like middle school romance thing going on where you make fun of the person that you love. One day in the camp, Gunray has Sio Bibble go through the camp, and he basically is showing him the camp to send a message to his queen that the people are dying and that there's suffering going on. And as Gunray is going through the camp, they pass by Sashay's tent, and Gunray orders one of his droids to grab Sashay by the neck and basically kind of choke her a little bit, and he forces Bibble to watch this. As this is going on, Sashay is pretending to be this young girl. I believe she's like 12 or 13 in this book, but she's pretending to be like a 6 or 7-year-old girl, and she tells Sio Bibble, tell the queen that the death toll is catastrophic, and the word toll is actually a code word that the handmaidens made to tell the queen that they were actually okay. And that whole, the death toll is catastrophic, is actually in episode 1. Time continues on in the camp. There's pretty much no food, and there's people stealing food from the Trade Federation stores, and they were actually executed in public for this. One day, Sashay is actually transporting some of these comm code blankets to different prisoners, and she gets caught by one of the droids. She's then sent over to one of the overseer, and the overseer looks at this blanket and she's like, I know what you guys are doing. I don't understand what it says yet, but I know you guys are up to something and you will tell me. Sashay pretends to be this clueless child. She's like, I have no idea what's going on, but it doesn't work on the overseer, and the overseer then interrogates Sashay and she gets tortured. Her whole face gets kind of like wrinkled and mutilated, and as well as her entire body. However, Sashay does not reveal any information, and she is then released, and everyone is just distraught. We go to Padme on Tatooine. She actually talks to Shmi Skywalker before Anakin goes to his pod racing thing, and she just goes on to say, how Anakin is this child, he always tries to do what's best, and I always want to do what's best for him. And this really strikes home for Padme, because she thinks, she's like, on Naboo we had no slavery, people are free, they can do whatever they want. And this kind of shows us what happens in Queen Peril, where Padme wants to free all of the slaves on Tatooine, and I believe this is like the stem of why she wants to do that, is this conversation with Shmi Skywalker. After this whole Tatooine pod racing thing, Padme has her whole chat to the Senate building. She tells them, what's going on. She basically tells Valorum to step down because all the people in Naboo are going to die and that the Republic is failing them. And since the Senate is not doing anything just yet, she then decides to go back to Naboo to try and sneak in and start a revolution with the Gungans. As they are traveling back to Naboo, Padme and Sabe have a heart-to-heart, and Sabe just goes on to say, that whole thing of Harley, forget about it, I'm your friend, I will be with you to the end, we're going to do this together. And Padme's like, you're my friend too. And this is where Sabe finally sees that, her entire life she always wanted to be number one. She always wanted to be the head of something, but she kind of realizes now that, no matter what, she will always be number two. That's kind of just her role in life. She can never be one, but she can be a really good number two and support Padme through whatever she goes through. After this whole heart-to-heart, Padme and Sabe work together to formulate some type of speech that they can give to the Gungans to try and get them on their side. And so they kind of prepare to set up this whole thing, because Sabe is going to give the speech instead of Padme, just in case something happens. Back on Naboo, before Padme and her team lands, Maul is actually going through the entire Naboo palace. He's like, wow, the Naboo art is beautiful, it's so intricate, it's gorgeous, and he actually inspects the entire palace and he plans out exactly where he's going to take the Jedi. He's like, this is going to be a 1 versus 2. I'm going to have to take them into this shield generator room area, because this is going to be the best place for me to fight them. And it kind of was a little interesting to see how Maul reacts to the palace. You know, when we think of Maul, we think of just this assassin killing machine, but in reality, he can respect art as well. Padme and her whole team land back on Naboo. Pinaka uses the sewer system to sneak into the prison camps, and he frees Sasha, Yane, Mariak, as well as a few of the Naboo pilots so they can assault the Trade Federation in space. Padme and everyone else, they meet up with the Gungans. They have that whole conversation with the Gungan boss, and Sabe's upset with herself. Padme had to step in during this whole speech to try and get the Gungans on their side. And Sabe's like, you know, I failed you. I was supposed to be number 2. This was my one job to do, Padme. I failed you. And Padme just says, you know, Sabe, you didn't fail me. Your job was to be a decoy. They needed honesty, and this was a lie. We can't lie to the Gungans, because if we lie and we pretend that you're the queen, even though you're not the queen, they might not believe us in the end, and they might not join us. And Padme just reassures Sabe, you know, don't worry about this. You know, we are here to fix each other's flaws, and we're here to fix each other's issues. This was not going to work, so I'm there to step in. The same thing will happen later when something that I'm trying to do doesn't work. You'll be there to help me, Sabe. So the Naboo battle is underway. We have the fighters up in space. We have the Gungans on the field fighting the massive army, and Padme and Sabe are in the palace, and they're going to try and sneak to the throne room. We have Sabe dressed up as the queen and Padme dressed up as a handmaiden. Padme and her team gets to the throne room first, but she is surrounded by the Viceroy and all of his droids. Sabe is walking up the corridor, and she sees this dressed up as the queen, and she tries to distract the Viceroy so that she can try to save Padme, because she thought that Padme was going to die there. The Viceroy is like, you know, listen, this one's a decoy. That's the real queen. In reality, they actually had the real queen. And so Padme then opens up the guns out of the throne, and they basically win the battle. So the whole Naboo crisis is over now. The Trade Federation is gone. They're cleaning up the mess. Anyone that died fighting the Trade Federation in this battle had the queen's sigil on their gravestone. All of the droids were collected and are actually being scrapped to make art. And Qui Gon's funeral occurs in Naboo, which is actually very rare. Most Jedi actually bring their dead back to the Jedi Temple, and they have the funeral service there. Padme's at the funeral, and she stays all the way to the end. She just ponders on, if it wasn't for Qui-Gon Jinn, Naboo would not be free. And that is it for the end of the full summary. I hoped you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be posting more Star Wars novels, summary, and review videos. So if you do like this type of format, please subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. But anyways, guys, I will see you in the next one. Stay frosty.